I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and this is a Nissan Qashqai. Now you'll probably be familiar with that name because this was one of the original disruptors of the SUV marketplace. But 7 years into its second generation, does it still have what it takes to compete with the Johnny-come-latelys like the Mazda CX-30 and the Kia Seltos? Well, that's what we're going to find out today. Now we've got the range-topping TI variant here, and you can tell that because of an extra little bit of silver highlighting down here on the front bumper and a not particularly attractive set of 19-inch wheels, which, as we'll get to in a minute, actually also hurt this vehicle's success in other areas too. So perhaps you might be best off sticking with the mid-spec cars. But we're going to hop inside the interior where we find that this Qashqai, especially in TI spec, has a couple of really nice things going for it. Starts with these seats, but there's a couple of things that make it feel just a touch old hat in here. This 7-inch infotainment screen in front of me is, for a start, quite a long reach from the driver's seat. It's also pretty small in size in this segment now, with cars pretty much all moving up to a minimum of 8 inches. It does at least have a couple of features, including Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, though it is a wired system, and I've had a couple of troubles with it through the week disconnecting while it's plugged in, so I'm not sure if that's me or the system, but it has been quite annoying. You do also get a map system, so navigation in this TI as well, and it's a pretty awkward thing to use. It does feel definitely a little bit old school. Moving down, you get a really straightforward climate control thing. It's not through any menus in any extra systems. Below that, we have a little tray for odds and ends storage where there's one 12-volt socket. As for other practicalities in this car, it's pretty decent. You've got two nice sized cup holders here between the seats. You do have decent sized door bins as well, but they're not really big enough to fit a 1-litre bottle in. You've got a really deep central bin, which has got a nice little tray storage separate for like putting your phone on or keys or anything like that, which is nice and flock lined, so it stops things from rattling about too much. But there's no real place to put your phone outside of there, so if you want to have it out there and on display, it's a bit awkward, so you have to sort of pop it in there. As for everything else, the actual ambiance in here is pretty nice. This vehicle is equipped with the sliding moonroof. It doesn't open, but you get the nice glass panoramic roof, which is pretty good and brings a lot of extra light into the cabin. This steering wheel as well is really nice. It's a good size and it's a good thickness, and it just has a nice sort of sports car-y vibe about it, although I don't know if we need the flat bottom for a small SUV really. Materials are a bit of a mixed bag too. There's some soft touch up here on the dashboard. There's a little bit of soft touch up on the door cards, but they do feel generally pretty flimsy. Even though this Qashqai is built in the UK, it doesn't feel like a particularly well put together item. You do at least get some nice padding on the armrests, and the center bin is nicely padded and finished in stitched leather, which is pretty nice. As well, you get these pads to rest your knee on when you're cornering, so you don't have it brushing up against any sort of hard plastics, which is a really nice, thoughtful touch. Finally, we come to the seats, which are the absolute highlight of this car in my opinion. They're quilted leather items, and they have 2-stage heating, which is either not hot enough or way too hot, but that's not such an issue in Australia. You do have 6-way power adjustment with 4-way lumbar adjustment for the driver as well, so you can put them into a really nice comfortable position, and you get a decent driving position with a good commanding view out. So the front seat then is a pretty decent place to spend time in terms of comfort, but we'd really love to see that infotainment system upgraded to keep up with this vehicle's competitors. Now let's hop in to the back of the Qashqai, where we find a nice wide door opening. So it'll be pretty easy to load your child seats in, and on that topic we've got 2 ISOFIX ports on each outboard seat, and you've got a central tether for the middle seat as well, but you probably wouldn't be able to get 3 across here. As for space for me, at 6'2", my head is just brushing against the roof. That's obviously a combination of a sort of fairly low roofline and the optional sunroof fitted to this vehicle, though if you're less than 6'2", which quite a lot of people are, you probably won't have any issues with headroom back here. Behind my own seating position, I've got just enough knee room to be fairly comfortable, and the tow room on offer is really good, so the space is fine. The other issues with the back seat though include going to hard touch back here, which for 40 grand you kind of expect slightly better than that. You also don't get any air vents in any Qashqai model. You just get this sort of ugly hole where you can put stuff that'll just fall out, which just sort of, yeah, it's really annoying in a hot country like Australia. At least the padding and the actual squab itself is extremely comfortable on the outboard seats. It's got the same sort of quilted leather material as the front seats. But this car really is strictly a four-seater because this middle seat is a real perch, so you don't get any headroom. It might not look much higher than the outboard seats, but it's a lot firmer and doesn't allow you to sink in. You do at least get this rather quality feeling armrest here for the passengers in the back with a couple of square cup holders that wouldn't do a very good job of holding cups, and you get some door bins which take a 700ml bottle but wouldn't take a 1 litre bottle. So the back seat then is a pretty good place to spend time as long as it's not a hot day and as long as you're not too tall, which is fine because really a car like this is going to be used mainly for 4 people at a maximum and mostly just 2 people for couples and that sort of thing. If you need more space than that, you're going to have to jump up to this car's bigger brother, the X-Trail. Now, coming around the boot, it's a pretty practical space back here. You get 430 litres of space, which is a reasonable number for this class, not outstanding, but also not too bad. You do get a couple of nifty features too, including this little fold-up cargo protector to stop your shopping bags and stuff sliding around. That is only on this TI model though. On this TI you also get some tie-down hooks underneath. However, the rest of the carpeting in the boot feels like it's pretty low rent. So apart from that, there's no cargo nets. You've got to spend an extra $230 at the dealer to get one of those, which I think is a bit of a shame. And there's also not really any hooks. There's these sort of attempts at curry hooks, but nothing particularly amazing. So let's shut that boot and sort of admire this car's looks. It's not a bad looking vehicle. I think it's just fine. My personal favourite part is perhaps the profile of it, where it's got some nice haunches which kind of remind me of the Nissan Murano concept car of many years ago. Anyway, let's get to the good stuff and jump inside the Qashqai and take it out for a spin on the road. So what's Qashqai TI like to drive out on the road? Well, there's a couple of things about it that are pretty endearing, but it really is starting to feel its age now. It's 7 years old, and even though it was updated in 2018 with a couple of new features and retuned ride and handling, there's some things that just really don't keep up with the competition anymore, and that starts with the engine. So this car runs a 2-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder unit that pumps out 106 kilowatts and 200 newton meters, which are pretty low figures considering this car's 1.4 ton weight, and it just feels a little bit kind of weak. It does its best work between 3.5 and 5,000 RPM, where it's in the meatiness of its sort of torque curve, where it's producing around that 200 newton meters, but it doesn't have the inspiration that you get from a turbo motor. And oddly, Nissan does sell this vehicle in other parts of the world, namely Europe, with a 1.6 litre turbocharged engine, but we don't get it here in Australia, probably because people would buy less of them because it's a smaller engine and therefore would see that it is a less powerful motor. However, we reckon this would suit the Qashqai as a character really quite a lot better. Now, this engine is combined with a CVT gearbox, which is okay. It's not a bad CVT in terms of comfort and refinement. It's pretty well oiled. It feels like it shifts quite smoothly. There's only a couple of times where you can feel a little bit of shudder, but that's when you're sort of adjusting your pace on the road, so going from slow to fast or something like that. So it's not a big issue, but it does promote pretty lazy throttle response below 2,500 RPM, which don't inspire much confidence. You can lock it into a manual mode using the, a fake manual mode and sort of fake rubber bandy ratios using the gear stick, but there's no actual sport mode. There's only an eco mode, which dulls the throttle response even further. You won't get great fuel economy though, even if it was in eco mode. On our test route, which is pretty favourable, we ended up at 9.9 litres per 100. That's a fair mix of sort of back roads and open roads and freeway stuff. So if you're driving it around town, you're probably going to see above 11-12 litres per 100. So perhaps not the greatest SUV for city use. As for refinement, the engine does flare up a little bit above 4,500 RPM. It gets pretty noisy, but if you keep it below that and sort of thrust around on its reasonable amount of torque, then it is a very well refined car. The road noise and general serenity is pretty good. It feels like you can sort of switch off in this vehicle. It's not loud, and I reckon passengers would have no issue sleeping on a long trip. The only issue with this particular car is at 7,000 kilometers on the clock, there are some rattles and shakes starting to develop in the dashboard and behind me there in the B-pillar. That may have a little bit to do with what this car is riding on, because it's riding on some pretty big 19-inch wheels with 225 45 19 Dunlop Sportmax tyres, which are a pretty aggressive tyre. They've got a pretty stiff sidewall, and that does feel like it's got a little bit to do with the reasonable steering feel. However, it really does jar through into this car. Some of the bigger hits really do jar through and shake passengers a little bit, and it's a little unrefined, to be honest. More of a reason to go for one of the more affordable ST Plus or STL base specs, in our opinion. But that kind of brings us on to the chassis and how this thing handles. And despite the fact that there's a really anemic engine and throttle response that do their best to really stop you enjoying this chassis, peeling back those layers, you do actually get pretty decent amount of talent under this car. It feels quite a lot like a hatchback. It is a little bit taller, so there's a little bit more roll in corners, but it's very neutral and has a decent amount of throttle adjustability when you get to it. But the fact that the engine's lazy responses and the sort of very slow steering rack of this car, that's kind of, you can feel like you're driving in a sitcom. You can wiggle the wheel back and forth and feel nothing going on at the front tires. It's just like these layers of squidge on top of this chassis, which is reasonably well refined, which I think is a bit of a shame. But obviously that's not going to be of huge importance to most people. What is going to be important is this car's ride, and its low-speed ride is pretty knobbly. Again, a function probably of those wheels and tires, but also a function of pretty stiff damping and springing. It never feels like it really settles below 70 k's an hour. You kind of get this consistent sort of head toss feeling. As you bring it up to higher speeds on country roads, it does improve a little, but it still doesn't feel quite as plush as I want my SUV to be. And then of course we come to the safety features of the Qashqai, which is probably where it's showing its age the worst, because the base model only gets AEB without pedestrian detection, and that's pretty much it. Lane departure warning and driver attention warning as well. Stepping up to the ST Plus and the STL, which we think are where the best value of the range is, they get rear cross traffic alert and blind spot monitoring as well, which is a nice balance, because adding on top of that with this TI is an adaptive cruise control system and a lane keep assist that works via the brakes in this car, which is a bit of a weird thing. It doesn't do a very good job of keeping you in lane, but it does give you a decent warning. And the cruise control system sort of wavers up to 10 kilometers an hour in our testing. We found it too, so it's not a very well thought out system. The Qashqai did get 5 stars from ANCAP when it was tested back in 2013, and it's also got 6 airbags. So the crash structure itself is safe. It's just lacking A, polish, and B, the sheer presence of some of the active safety features that its other rivals get. So those are our thoughts on the Nissan Qashqai. There's a couple of great features about it, but that engine still really just lacks the punch of some of the competitors. But I think that a lot of this car's problems could be solved by just fitting the 1.6 litre turbocharged engine that the rest of the world gets. But you can let me know in the comment section down below if you'd like to see that. Otherwise, the Qashqai is a pretty decent thing to drive. It's nice and serene, and it's got some really comfortable seats in this TI model. We just think that the mid-spec variants offer a bit more value and a bit more driving comfort thanks to their smaller wheels. But again, let me know. Do you have a Qashqai Ti that you love? I'd love to hear about it. While you're down there, we'd also love it if you could hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you never miss one of our full-length videos. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.